We start the second parak of Horyos, and we deal with the carbon of the Kohen Mashuach. Hora Kohen Mashuach liatzmo shogeg v'yasa shogeg mevi par. So there's a special par that the Torah assigns for the Kohen Mashiach, as it says in Vayikra Daled im HaKohen Mashiach yechita liashmas ha'am. We'll see about those words liashmas ha'am. Ve'ikriv al chataso asher chata par ben bakar. So the Mishnah says that the classic case in which the Kohen Mashuach is chayav a carbon par is the case where there was a hora. He himself made a decision in the halacha, a mistaken decision, and he followed through. For example, he ate the chelev that he said was mutter. However, if he was shogeg v'asa mezid or mezid v'asa shogeg, if it wasn't both a shogeg in the hora, which is called halama, halama's davar, or even if it was a shogeg in the hora, but it was not a shogeg in the Maisa, which is a very hard concept to understand exactly how that happens. But apparently, on the one hand, he concluded in his mind that a certain kind of chelev is mutter. But then, when it came to eating the chelev, he decided that no matter what his ruling was, he's going to eat that prohibited chelev. Or in the reverse case, where he deliberately ruled against the Torah, and when he came to eat the chelev, he was a shogeg. So in these cases where it wasn't both hora liatzmo b'shogeg plus asa b'shogeg, then he doesn't bring the par. He's potter. Shoras Kohen Mashiach liatzmo koras bezdin l'tzibur. Just like in the case of a par heli dover shel tzibur, it means that first Bezdin issued an erroneous ruling to permit something which the Torah prohibits with a chiyuv kares, like for example chelev, and then most of the tzibur went ahead and relying on the Bezdin, which is also kind of a shogeg, they ate the chelev. So too, we're going to derive soon in the Gemara Kohen Mashuach from the law of par helim dover shel tzibur, and therefore we need both conditions. It's got to be hora bishkaga, and it has to be asiya bishkaga. So the Gemara asks, shogeg v'asa shogeg, maybe par pshita. Why do you have to tell me? I mean, there is a parsha of par Kohen Mashiach. It's got to be in a case of shogeg and shogeg, where is shogeg both in the hora and a shogeg in the ma'isa. I didn't need for you to tell me that. He doesn't remember why he came to that conclusion, and he ruled lakula regarding some isur of kares, and he says, I'm doing based on my hora, even though I don't remember, I have no recollection of what the tam and the explanation for that conclusion, that hora that I ruled, but I'm relying on that ruling. And that's the Chiddush of our Mishnah. Ma'od Detem, I would have thought, Kevan de'iu misyadale shema hadarbe, if he would only remember why he came to that conclusion to permit chelev, then probably he wouldn't have followed through and ate the chelev. And therefore, we might have thought that his status is similar to an intentional sinner, because admittedly, had he known what the logic that underlined his original permissible ruling was, he would have certainly rescinded that ruling. And Kamash Malon, the Mishnah wants to say no, that even this is within the realm of Shogeg and Ischai. Then the Mishnah says, Mezid v'asa Shogeg, if he had a Mezid at the time of the Horah, and then when he did the Maisa and he ate the Chelev, he was a Shogeg, he's exempt from a Chatos, and that is because the law that applies to a Kohen Meshuf Mecham is identical to the law that applies to Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur. Minani Mili, where do you have this equation between Kohen Meshuf Mechama and Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur? The Tan Rabbanan, because we learned in a Brisa, and here we're going to quote that part of the pasuk that we mentioned earlier. That would be something to teach us and darshan from La'ashmas Ha'am. The Torah uses the word liashmas ha'am to indicate that the status of the Kohen Mashiach is like the status of the Am, meaning the Tzibur, Hari Mashiach b'Tzibur, and he's like the case of Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur. So the Gemara asks the following: why do we need this pasuk of liashmas ha'am? Couldn't we have derived the analogy, the equation between Kohen Mashiach and Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur logically? V'lo dinu. It's a logical conclusion. And here we start today's daf Zayin. Tzibur mutza michlal yochid. Right, the chatos of a yochid, if an individual violates, let's say, chelev, the shogeg, is a certain carbon, but not the same carbon as a par helim dovashel tzibur. In fact, a yochid who violates, let's say, for example, a chelev b'shogeg, he will bring either a kizba or or a seira. But here we're bringing a par, and Mashuach is also mutza michlal yochid, right? Because the Torah says that the Mashiach takes on a different carbon than that of a classic chatos of an individual who, as we said before, is a seira or a kizba. And here, in the case of the Kohen Mashuach, he brings a par. Is matzi ben chayov elal helim tover im shigas maisa af Mashiach elo yehei chayav elal helim tover im shigas maisa. So we derive from helim tover shel tzibur that you need both the mistaken ruling and following and relying on that ruling, and that's when the Kohen Mashiach Muhammad is going to be chayav his par. Oh, the Gemara says, wait a minute, let's try a different approach. Klach l'derech zu. Why don't we compare Kohen Mashiach to the Nasi? Nasi also is in the descriptive category of Mutza Mechlal Yochid, because, again, instead of a Kizba and a Seira, his Karman is a Sa'ir, a male goat. Mashiach is also Mutza Mechlal Yochid, and instead of a Kizba and a Seira, he brings a par. Ma Nasi, maybe Shigas Maisa below Helim Dovar, right? The special karmachatas of a Nasi, which, as we said before, is a Sawyer, that is not engendered by any sort of reliance on an erroneous ruling. And therefore, Af Mashiach maybe B'Shigas Maisa below Helim Dover. You don't need Helim Dover, meaning a mistaken ruling. So now the Brisa continues. It says, Nira Lemi Doma. Let's see if we can tip the scale. Is Mashiach closer to Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, or is he closer to Nasi? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says that Nira Lemi Doma Tzibur B'Par V'Ein Mevim Ashim Toli. Wow. We're going to say that there's a certain striking similarity between Kohen Mashiach and the Tzibur in the Par Helim Dovashel Tzibur. And this reflects itself in two different ways. First of all, we said that the special coin of a nasi is a soyer, whereas the special carbon of the Mashiach is a par. That makes Mashiach strikingly similar to par helim davar shel tzibur. Number two, a Kohen Mashiach does not bring an Asham Talui. Asham Talui, if you recall, is when he doesn't know whether he violated the Isur Karis or not. And the same is true for the Tzibur. The Tzibur has no carbon Asham. There's no such thing as a carbon Asham that comes with Tzibur. Is therefore if the equation is better in that direction and more powerful, there's Ma Tzibur and Chayvel Al Helim Dovim Shigas Maisa. Af Mashiach Eno Lo Yechalav Ela Al Helim Dovim Shigas Maisa. Now the Gemara makes another attempt to show a commonality and a similarity between Mashiach and the Nasi. Oklachla Derksu. Nasi Mevi Seira Bavodas Kocha. So again, even though the special carbon that we've been dealing with of a Nasi is a Sa'ir for violating inadvertently a Chiv Kares, but in the case of an Avodas Kochavim, which again, it's hard to believe how a Nasi could have violated Avodas Kochav, but anyway, it happened. And he brings a Seira, and he brings an Asham Vadai. Now, those two karbanos apply not only to the Nasi, but also to the Mashiach. Mashiach maybe Seira Bavodas Kochavu, maybe Asham Vadai. So this is all derived from a parsha, number one in Bamidbar Tesvav, number two in Vayikra Perak Hey and Perak Yutes. And basically for Avodah Zarah, we have a different set of karbanos. Because instead of a kizba or a seira for a common person, the Nasi will bring a Sair, and the Kohen, meaning Mashuach, will bring a Par. And that is all true for every single violation, with the exception of idolatry. In the case of idolatry, the individual rank and file citizen, or for that matter, the case of the Nasi, or for that matter, the case of the Kohen Mashuach, he brings that same carbon, the Seira, which is the normal carbon for a Chatos. And the Nasi brings the Seira, which the Kohen Mashiach will also bring the Seira in Avodas Kochavim. And not only that, both of them are Chayv and Asham Vadai. And therefore, my conclusion from this equation would be Ma Nasi maybe Vishigas Maisa, and we don't need a Horos Shkaga. Af Mashiach maybe Vishigas Maisa, even without a Helim in the Psat. So it comes out now, according to the argument of the Brisa, that a Kohen Mashuach is similar to the Par Helim with regard to the Par and the fact that there's no carbon Asham. But on the other hand, he's similar in certain respects to the Nasi. And therefore, we really don't know whether the analogy that's justified here is to the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur or to the carbon of Nasi. Talmud Lomer, now we understand why you need the Ashmas Ha'am, which is comparing the Kohen Moshiach to the Am. Harei hu Mashiach ki tzibur. The status of the Mashiach, the Kohen Mashiach, is like that of the tzibur. Ma tzibur mevi al helim tovim shigas ma'isa. Af Mashiach enu mevi el al helim tovim shigas ma'isa. So now the Gemara comes back to fight and raises the following objection. Ema, I still have a different perspective on the comparison of the Kohen Moshiach to the tzibur. Why mat tzibur horovi asu achra ba'oraso chayeven? What happens when the tzibur receives from the bezdin a kula? The people went ahead and followed this kula in actual practice, and they bring a par helim dovashel tzibur zaf mashiach shahorovi asu achrov bora aso yechayev. Why does it have to be that the special carbon of the Kohen Mashiach is only if the Kohen Mashiach himself violates his own hora? Let somebody else violate the hora. Because if we're comparing Kohen Mashiach to Parhelim Dovashel Tzibur, and Parhelim Dovashel Tzibur, we're not talking about the hora, we're not talking about the violation on the part of the Bale Hora, meaning the members of the court, but rather we're talking about the community. That's a chayrim. Talmud Loma vehikriv al chatos asher chata. Therefore, with regard to Kohen Mashiach, the pasuk says that he has to bring his carbon for his sin, asher chata, that he sinned, not for somebody else's sin as a result of his mistaken hora. Al masher chata hu mevi, if he ain't mevi, al masher chata acherim. Omar Mar, let's go back to the Shakavitaria, the Braisa, Moshiach Bepar. Fi ein mevi asham tolui, that the Kohen Moshiach does not bring a carbon asham, which is brought on a suffix. Minole di ein mevi asham tolui. It would seem from the Torah that anyone can be obligated in asham tolui. Why do you exclude the Kohen Mashiach? And the Gemara answers the Chsiv, the pasuk says, "V'kiper olav hakohen al shigos asher chata." So keep in mind that there's the shogeg and there's asher shogeg. So shigoso means the sin, asher chata means it was inadvertent, not deliberate, and mi shechatoso v'shigoso shove, if the chet and the shgaga was the same, he says here that this is referring to a regular person who incurs a chatos when he commits a definite transgression. So we know that he violated chelev, but he did it b'shogeg, and there was no ruling of the bezdin. Is yotza Mashiach she'ein shigos v'chatos b'shavah. Right? Because in the case of Mashiach, if he violates that Isur because of his own mistaken Orah, he brings a par instead of a Kizba or a Se'ira for a regular Chatos. Tichsiv li'ashmas ha'am. Again, now we get back to that pasuk li'ashmas ha'am. Hareu Mashiach Ketzibur. That's going to give us an equation between the Kohen Mashiach and the Tzibur. And therefore, just like the Tzibur is only going to be chayiv a par helim dovashel Tzibur because of an oversight in a Horah, so too the Kohen Mashiach will bring a par for an oversight in a matter of a Horah. Where it says, wait a minute, liashmas ha'om ad kan lo kamerle. Why are you relying on the pasuk liashmas ha'am as if to say that if not for the pasuk liashmas ha'am, I wouldn't know this? It's only because I have the reasoning of liashmas ha'am. We would derive that a Kohen Mashiach doesn't bring a chatos, an asham talui, without that pasuk. Ella, Sigmar concludes that asham kidinas, but it was just mentioned on the fly, so to speak. All right, so this leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Zayin. Hora b'fnei atzmo v'yosa b'fnei atzmo, niskapelo b'fnei atzmo. So if the Kohen Mashiach ruled for himself and he acted out independent of the tzibur, then he has to bring his own kapara independent of the kapara, and that's the chatos par lechatos that's brought by the Kohen Mashiach. Horei matzibur v'yosem matzibur. But if he was part of the hora of the tzibur, and like the people who relied on that hora and they ate chalev, so too he ate chalev, is piskapelo im hatzibur. So he will get his kapara through the par helim dovashel tzibur. She'ein bezdin chayovin ad sheyoru levatel miktas ulakayim miktas. V'chein HaMashiach. So the Mishnah explains why the Kohen Mashiach will achieve kapara through the par helim dovashel tzibur, because just like the Bezdin is not chayev, if they are oker an entire mitzvah of the Torah, they completely remove mitzvah. They have to be mavatal mitzvah v'kayim mitzvah, and only then are they liable to bring a chatos. And the same din applies to a Kohen Mashiach. And then the Mishnah adds a little bit of a conclusion. It says, "V'loa bavodas kochavim ad sheyoru levatel miktzas ulekayim miktzas." Okay. Fekta Gemara minani mili. From whence do you derive the conclusion that a Kohen Mashiach gets the same kapara as the rest of the tzibur through the parallel dovashel tzibur the Torah Rabbanu learned to the Bryce? Hora im hatzibur v'yosim hatzibur. If the Kohen Mashiach gave a ruling together with the ruling of the Bezdin on behalf of the tzibur, and he acted along with that kahal, is yochol yovi parli atzmo. Maybe I should think that in this case, although the community itself will bring a different carbon, he, the Kohen Mashiach, will bring a par. But if he actually relied on the psak of the Bezdin and he did the identical avera as the tzibur, then he doesn't have his own personal carbon, but rather he hooks up with the parallel and dovashel tzibur, and he gains his kapara through not the parli atzmo, but the partial tzibur. So now this Yachol raises a Havamina possibility that the Kohen Mashuach would have to bring his own power. Frekti Gemara Vidinu. I don't understand such a possibility. Nasi Mutza Michal Yachid. Mashiach Mutza Michal Yachid. My Nasi Chata Bifnei Atzma. Maybe Bifnei Atzmo. The Nasi is Chayav a Korban if he simply violates Chelev B'Shogeg. Is Chata Matzibur Miskaperlo Matzibur. If the Nasi was a shogeg, relying on the Horah of Bezdin, the same way that the rest of the people were, is he will link up with the Kaparas HaTzibur through the parallel of Dovashal Tzibur. Af Mashiach, so too, we should apply that logic to the Mashiach. Chata Bifnei Atzmo, Mevi Bifnei Atzmo, Bifnei Atzmo. So again, if he sins without relying on the tzibur, who relied on the horah, then he brings his own korban chatos. Chatim at tzibur miskapelo. But if he sinned not as an individual alone, but he sinned together with the whole community, then he could dig in and latch on to the kapar of the tzibur through parhelim dovashal tzibur. So the bottom line of this whole discussion here in the Vraisa is, why should I think that when he sins together with the community, he requires a separate kapara? And the Vraisa says, lo. Im amartu bin nasi. If you're going to tell me that a nasi gains his kapara through the partial tzibur, does that make sense? Because in fact, the kaparas Yom Kippurim is chal even vis-a-vis the nasi. Is Tomar, you want to make an equation to Moshiach, Sheim is kapelo matzibur b'Yom Kippurim. And this is based on Vayikra Perek Tezayin. There's a special chatas that are brought on Yom Kippur for the avera of entering into the temple or eating hegdesh in a state of tumah. So we'll bring the par on behalf of the Kohen Gadol and a se'ira and another se'ira is hoil v'enum is kapelo matzibur b'Yom Kippurim yochel yavi parli atzma tamelomar chatos asher chata haketzad chata b'fnei atzmo maybe b'fnei atzmo chata im atzibur miskapelo matzibur. So that's the final conclusion here regarding a Kohen Mashiach, that he brings his own chatos if his violation was independent of the tzibur. But if his violation was with the tzibur and they too violated, then his kapara comes through the helim par shel tzibur. Okay, now we found in our Mishnah that if the Kohen Mashiach sets up a ruling for himself, then his kapara will be independent of the tzibur. Now, what happens in a case where both the Kohen Mashiach, erred, as well as the court? He violated his own Horah, and they violated their Horah. So both the Kohen Mashiach issued an erroneous Horah, and the Bezdin issued an erroneous Horah, but they concerned different prohibitions. So the Bezdin, for example, was matir one form of chelev, and the Kohen Mashiach was matir some form of avodah zarah. So the Mishnah establishes that since the Kohen Mashiach's ruling is independent of the Bezdin, he has to be atoned with his own carbon. He can't rely on the carbon Helem Davar Shel Tzibur. Hechidami, what's the case? He's the outstanding expert, and they're not experts in the law. Is pshita the miskapelo b'fnei atzmo horad delahon lo klum? Because we learned earlier, I think it was on Daf Daled, that if the mufla is not around, then the horah doesn't even get off the ground. You can't call it a horah b'tos that generates a chiv helim davar shel tiv. It's not a horah at all. Uboy atuye kizba oseira kol chad v'chad. So again, since the decision of the Bezdin was made without the mufla, therefore it doesn't generate a par helem davar shel tzibur, and therefore each member of the tzibur that violated that ruling of the Bezdin minus the mufla has to bring his own personal chatos. That's called miskaper l'fnei atzma. And what's a personal chatos? Asui kizba o seira kol chad v'chad. The inun muflan, but if it's the case where the Bezdin is made up of muflaim, so therefore their horah is a valid horah, v'hu lav mufla, but he's not a mufla, is amay miskapelo b'fnei atzma horah didei lav klumhi. And let's apply the same standard down the line. If you're saying that without a mufla, there's no horah, or in the Lashon Hagamar lav klumu, then say the same thing in a case where the Mashuach Mulchama, the Mashuach, Kohen Mashuach, is not a mufla.